Hey guys, my name's Colin and this is Colin Talks Crypto. I'm going to talk to you about PulseChain and the massive 79 billion Hex tokens that just got sacrificed by the Origin account worth $14 billion. What does this mean? If you saw my recent video, I shared with you PulseChain, Richard Hart's answer to scalability and congestion on the Ethereum blockchain. In this video, we're going to talk about how the entire sacrifice phase went down. The sacrifice phase was a period of about 19 days ending on August 3rd, whereby you could sacrifice tokens or coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum, ERC20 tokens, other blockchains, Cardano, EOS, Bitcoin Cash, etc. You could sacrifice those tokens, like send them to an address that someone holds the keys to. We don't know who. You're sacrificing them. You'll never get them again. And in return for that, you'll get Pulse tokens. Now, the thing is at the end of this 19 days, on the last day, someone, Richard Hart, sent 14 or $13 billion worth of Hex tokens to the Ethereum address. And I'll put some of this on the screen so you can follow what I'm talking about here. Rather than just take people's word for it, I actually did some investigative journalism myself. I went to the PulseChain Ethereum sacrifice address. I exported the last 2 days worth of entries. The PulseChain sacrifice period ended on August 3rd. So I started with August 2nd and went all the way through to the end. So what you see on your screen here, I'll just run through this real quickly, are the transaction hashes for each one of the transactions made, the timestamp, the address it was sent from, and the address it was sent to, and this is the Pulse Ethereum address, and lastly, the amount of Hex on the right here that had been sacrificed. And so I'm going to scroll down this. This is the 2nd of August. But get an idea of the sizes of Hex that are sacrificed. It varies quite a bit, from a very small amount all the way up to hundreds of thousands of Hex. On rare occasion, you'll see millions of Hex. But there's some very distinct patterns here that I want to take a look at. And so we keep on scrolling down. This is still the 2nd of August. And I highlighted some rows. And we'll take a closer look at these highlighted rows later. And then here we hit the 3rd of August. Right here is the 3rd of August, and almost immediately after, starting on this last day, there's only about 4 hours left in this particular period, and the patterns begin. So the green color is a GigaWhale that is submitting 100 million to 200 million in Hex transactions within minutes of each other, or seconds of each other, in some case almost on top of each other. And it happens 144 times, and they're all very similar amounts of Hex. Too close together and too similar of amount to be coincidence. Nowhere else in the sacrifice history do you see this kind of a pattern. And then we get on to the yellow colored rows, which are the huge billion Hex transactions. And these are the ones that are the most alarming or the most obvious. But I would say that even the green ones are very obvious. And we'll get into the totals of these in a second. So starting just like 20 minutes after the green transactions ended, you see the yellow transactions. And they stand out because they're so enormous. There's no other transactions that are billions of Hex, let alone 60 in a row within 1 hour of each other, starting 20 minutes after this last 100,000 Hex transfer. So you can see here they are, 2.7 billion, 2.7 billion, 1.3 billion Hex, on down, lots of them. And you can see they really stand out when you look at the transactions between them. There's like 6,000, 42,000, 1.3 billion, 1.2 billion, etc. And then 6,000, 2,000. So it's very obvious that even though the sender tried to obfuscate his send address, it's obviously the same person or the same entity. And so here's all the yellow transactions. That's the final one, 500 million. That's the smallest one of all of them. And then you continue on down, and then we have the end of the Pulse sacrifice on 4 hours and 50 minutes into August 3rd. So I condensed this and made this easier to look at.
So we're going to take a look at just the green rows and just the yellow rows. But I wanted to show you the entirety of this so you can get an idea of what it looks like and how obvious the pattern is. So now we click on my second file here, and so this is what it looks like with all the extra transactions removed, and just focusing on this. You can see how very similar of amounts these are. The total of the green section equals 18.7 billion hex. Now let's get on to the yellow section. This is the billion hex transfers. So here you can see that there was a total, like I said, of 60 transactions, and these total 79 billion hex. And this is what I saw one Reddit post call to attention. They called to attention the 79 billion hex. But I don't know that anyone realized there was an additional 18 billion hex here. And so if you add these together, we have 97.9, basically 98 billion hex that are from some massive, massive entity. And the reason I assume they're the same entity is because, again, they're 15 minutes apart as far as when the green ones end and the yellow ones begin. They're not even interspersed amongst each other. They literally just pick up where the other one left off. But let's be conservative and just not make that assumption. We could just assume that the yellow ones together, which are the billion hex transfers, equals 79 billion hex, which is $14 billion at the time that this was sacrificed. If you figure in the additional hex from the green section above with 98 billion, that's probably closer to 17 or 18 billion dollars of hex that are actually from one GigaWhale. And I drew a timeline here so you can see how this went down. So the green GigaWhale, I think it's the same as the yellow GigaWhale, started at 4 minutes past on the final day and went to 1:22 a.m. The yellow GigaWhale went from 1:35 a.m. to 2:25 a.m. And the pulse sacrifice ended at 4:50 a.m. So all within a very tight span of time, all grouped together, all very similar amounts, and they pick up right where the other one left off. This many tokens must come from the origin account. And so basically the conclusion is that the Hex Origin Address controls a vast predominance of the PulseChain token supply, something like 90% or more. If you factor in the 98 billion, it's probably higher than 90% of all tokens.
You know, previously, before this particular sacrifice, I think we had less than $1 billion total sacrificed, and then suddenly, all in one fell swoop, $13 billion, diluted essentially every single sacrificer to the Pulse blockchain. And it happened in the last hour of the last day of this 19 days. So I'm going to read for you a series of tweets I made kind of explaining my take on this. And then we're also going to sort of read some conversations that the community had, and I've highlighted some that I thought were really good at kind of articulating both sides of the coin on this particular move. Like, are people happy about this? Are people upset about this? You know, let's get a feel for what the community thinks, and then I'll just kind of summarize my opinion on the whole thing here. So I tweeted out and I said, during the last hour of the Pulse token sacrifice, the owner of the Hex Origin Address, likely Richard Hart, but we don't know for sure, acquired 90% of the PLS token supply by sacrificing 79 billion hex, worth approximately $14 billion, on the last day. This means PulseChain may be highly centralized, unless Richard burns or freezes these tokens upon the creation of the Pulse blockchain via the snapshot. However, and this is a big however, this all being said, I have a feeling Pulse may still go up in value, potentially enormously, because all of the same dynamics that were in play with Hex, a huge percentage of the token supply locked up by one entity who never sold or dumped any of them. I believe Richard will follow suit. So now, to me, PulseChain equals a 100% centralized but potentially huge moneymaker. I'm disappointed to see the last-minute move, unannounced to everyone who already sacrificed. PulseChain is no longer an Ethereum 2.0 replacement in terms of decentralization, despite Richard's claim that Pulse would have superior decentralization. I don't see that now. The only defending statements I've seen involve trusting the controller of the 90% PLS token supply. Remember, trust is not a part of crypto. Richard Hart states this often, so I'm surprised at this move, unless he has unspoken plans to burn or freeze these PLS tokens. So I'm not going to just throw him under the bus just yet, because maybe it's premature, and he did create tremendous value for the Hex tokens. Like, I personally received an enormous amount of free, 100% free airdropped Hex tokens. I sold those. I put all that money into PulseChain. So if PulseChain goes under, I'm not necessarily going to lose an enormous amount of money. It's money that I got for free from the Hex airdrop, essentially. But nonetheless, people did put real money into this, and that was real money. You know, I could have taken that money, I could have cashed out, I could have put it into Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything else. So it's not to say that I'm willing to lose that money, right? And it is possible that he could have some plan in play to make this not centralized. So I'm not going to commit and say he's a scammer, he centralized the chain, and it's over, because the chain isn't even live yet. You know, we still have the test net to go, and it's not finalized yet. Now, here's one big difference that I want to make here. And we'll get into this more with some of these user comments as well. But the big difference about what Richard Hart did and what some people make an analogy to, which is not correct, is that in a proof-of-stake system, such as PulseChain, a 90% token ownership equals potential full control of the chain. That means ability to freeze or censor any transaction, the ability to roll back the blockchain, the ability to steal funds, to print new tokens, literally to do anything. And that is what we have now, unless, like I said, Richard Hart freezes or stops these tokens from coming into existence. If he allows himself or the Origin account to have 90% of the tokens of the entire Pulse blockchain, then he will have full control, or that entity will have full control and literally can do anything. It's a completely centralized blockchain, potentially, at that point. And the fact that it is potentially centralizable, I say potential because, you know, maybe he never moves the coins, maybe he never stakes the coins, maybe he never votes in a validator, but that's potential, right? Like, he could at any moment do that. What if the CIA comes knocking at his door with a gun and says, hey, roll back this chain, do this action? He's a central point of failure. And the entire reason we got into cryptocurrency was to avoid a central point of failure. So I would say, unless something changes, PulseChain is a complete and utter flop and mega fail in terms of an actual decentralized blockchain. That being said, maybe it will create value. Now, here's where the comparison takes place. In a proof-of-work blockchain, such as Bitcoin, token ownership does not control consensus. And that's a huge difference. For example, Satoshi had many coins, like 1 million coins perhaps, but that couldn't control consensus via mere token ownership, because a proof-of-stake blockchain operates differently than a proof-of-work blockchain. In a proof-of-work blockchain, you have miners that are upholding the consensus and creating those blocks. It doesn't matter how many tokens you have, it matters how much mining hardware you have and how much electricity you can burn. And that determines your hash rate, and that determines your influence in consensus on a proof-of-work blockchain. In a proof-of-stake blockchain, it depends on token ownership. He who controls the most tokens and stakes them and validates them controls the network. And in this case, the origin address does control the predominant supply, very likely to be Richard Hart. Like I said, he never admits it and never confirms it, because then it would be a security and then it would violate security laws. So we don't know for sure, right? I think we have a pretty good guess. And the sad thing is all of us who sent that money, all of us who sacrificed those tokens, had no idea that Richard was going to do this. That's why it's underhanded. And he did it at the last moment. Now, some say that maybe he did it at the last moment so that it didn't mess up the bonus multiplier. Fine, maybe that's the case. But the fact is we all got blindsided by this, and no one knew this was going to happen. And he gets called a scammer a lot, and he doesn't like it. And he, I think, tries to prove that he's not. But actions like this, I don't know, they don't really help him out, because he's not upfront about what's happening here. And he can pretend like he's not the origin address, but I think that that's maybe a little silly at this point. Okay, so now that I've read my comments on this, let's read some of the user feedback and just user comments on this, because there's a lot of really great points on this. And so here's a post. It's entitled, "Did Richard Hart just dilute everyone in the last hour?" And he says, "Looks like 79 billion hex came in last hour from potentially origin address accounts, which means if you put in real money and thought you would be a whale, you got wrecked. Richard Hart will control 90% of all supply of Pulse, while he publicly stated founders' allocation will be only 1%. I am sure it's the same excuse about controlling supply to control the price. And here's a reply to this. And some of these are for it and some of these are against it. So this user is very in favor of this. And he says, to me, this is insurance that can make me go to sleep worry-free. As much of a flawed man as Richard Hart is, what he says, he does. He just ended whale manipulation and stabilized the ethos. So why are you winning? Richard is a multi-billionaire and seems to have grand aspirations not only in this market, but to the world. He self-indulges as apex economist. So why would he destroy his incredible life? If Richard isn't the one holding the bag, I want out. Cross your fucking fingers, he did. You guys ain't sick of the manipulation? Call me a brainlet or not, but I trust him. Okay, there's a couple things I do not agree with on this post. First of all, I don't think that it stabilized the ethos of anything. Second of all, I don't know that we have confirmation that Richard is a multi-billionaire. He flaunts a lot of money. He could be a millionaire. I wouldn't be surprised at that. I'm not so sure if he's a billionaire or not. I think he likes to make it come across as if he is. Maybe he is. I think that's an assumption there. And it says that, why would he destroy his life and his reputation? I think that that is valid. I think that Richard will do almost anything to not destroy his reputation. He's very egocentric, very proud of his reputation. Reputation, I think, means everything to him. You can just judge that by his video screen in which he shares all of his Louis Vuitton bags and bears and purses and things. And actually, I really enjoy listening to Richard Hart. To be honest and unbiased, I find him to be incredibly intelligent. He knows what he's talking about. He knows blockchain. He's not making stuff up. He does understand it. And he has points of view that are very unique and ways of looking at things that other people haven't spotted before. And I give him credit for that. And I've learned a lot from him in that regard and new ways of thinking. So I'm not even here to bash Richard Hart. I'm just here to examine this very questionable behavior at the end of this and to ask you guys and discuss what does this mean? And another thing that I very much disagree with on this post is that he says, I trust him. And if Richard isn't the one holding the bag, I want out. I think that's the stupidest comment you could ever make. No offense to this poster here, but I trust him. Remember we go back to the tweet I made? Crypto is not about trust. If you have to insert trust into a supposedly trustless system, you have destroyed the fundamental tenet that makes the blockchain what it is. And so if we do have to trust the origination address to not take over all 33 validators on the Pulse blockchain, then we have a serious problem right there. In fact, it even begs the question, why would you bother having 33 validators on the Pulse blockchain when one entity has 90% of the tokens? He can take over all 33 spots at one go. You might as well just let him have one validator that he can control all in one go. And it makes you almost question, is the 33 validators just for show to make it appear like it's a decentralized blockchain when in fact, potentially, it could not be at any given moment? And the next user brings up a really good point. He says, I think the main issue will be gaining market trust from new smart money. Him, Richard Hart, holding 90% supply is troubling in regards to the proof of stake algorithm. He has enough coin to be every single of the 33 validators. Even if every Pulse participant delegated all of their coins, they wouldn't have enough to be one of the 33 validators. It's an extreme level of centralization. Short-term price pumps might be decent, but if we expect longevity from this chain, organic growth, and actual real-world use case, I will be tough to convince anyone with half a brain that Richard Hart can't literally invalidate any transaction he so chooses. And I think that's a very valid point. And Richard Hart has proven that he won't probably do that, right? Like on Hex, he never did that. And so you could almost say his track record shows he'll never do that. But again, crypto is not about trust. And one could lose one's keys, one could have one's keys stolen, one could have one's keys raided. It's just not a reliable way to operate. You don't want to have to hope that they're just going to get dumped on the market. I think how Richard operates is he realizes that the market is not totally rational and that the market does make allowances where perhaps it shouldn't. The market does allow for coins to get scammed and still retain value, or get hacked and still retain value, or in cases like this, maybe be fully centralized and yet still retain value. I think that is perhaps Richard Hart's observation of blockchain in general and how the markets react. He realizes that they don't go to zero, and so he can get away with something like this, and he can get away with something like this maybe and create a lot of value at the same time. So I get this, as I said, as a potential money play. Like, we might make a lot of money still, but I don't think that this is Ethereum 2.0 or 3.0. I think that this is Ethereum like 0.5. It's a step backwards in terms of decentralization. You know, he just basically ruined everything that PulseChain had going for it in terms of decentralization, threw it down the toilet, and exchanged it for full control, for his full control over the blockchain. It may be fast, it may have 3-second block times, it might be saving the environment and all of that, but if you don't have a decentralized blockchain, you might as well be running an Amazon web server. And this next user brings up a good point. He says, if it is the origin address sacrificing billions in Hex, last minute, no warning, and even if sometime in the future, Richard Hart's game theory move here benefits you, do you presently feel in any way tricked, deceived, confused by this move? And so this next user replied and said, so this is a user who is trying to explain why maybe this is a good thing. I don't know that I agree, but here's the take. This is the same thing that happened during the Hex big payday last November. Stakes were looking to make about 4x in this big payday. But in the days leading up to this point, everyone figured it'd be an easy cash grab. Even if you made a 2-day stake past the event date, you'd quadruple up. And if you quadrupled up overnight, what do you think most people would do the next day? Sell and crash the price. So at the last minute, the Hex Origin Address came in and swallowed up a lot of that 4x big payday ratio, giving us maybe only a 2x bonus. So it may have felt cold-blooded at first, as many of us had been watching and anticipating our expected payouts on the info page, and then not getting it. You're left feeling gutted. But it was a smart move that prevented a giant dump. And I expect that to be the same thing that happened with Pulse. So he thinks it's a protective move. We'll see. Next user replies and says, Hex does not have a proof-of-stake consensus algorithm, so it can be 99.9% centralized. Explain to me how 90% of the supply can ever be decentralized enough to have a proper consensus in a proof-of-stake system where Richard Hart can technically be every single one of the 33 validators and nobody can do anything. Oh, and he can lose his keys too or get hacked. And that's the point I've been trying to make. Not so much that he's going to lose his keys or get hacked, but that this proof-of-stake system is different than proof-of-work. And you can't just compare Hex to Pulse because Hex is running on a proof-of-work network, and a proof-of-stake network does depend on token holdings for consensus. Here's another comment. Just like Satoshi's wallet. This is a guy saying it's okay again, and I don't agree. Founders always own large percentages at the start. Same with Elon, Bezos, Vitalik, Charlie Lee, etc. So these guys all held large supplies of their particular project. It spreads out over time as liquidity sloshes around, and a big benevolent actor within the space, like a founder, can assure the rest of us that the other whales can't dominate us and really control things. This is most likely bullish as fuck. I disagree. I think that you're making an excuse. It's excusing decentralization, and it's trusting. And we don't do that in true decentralized blockchains. I think that's a mistake. And I think that he's also making the confusion that Satoshi's wallet didn't affect consensus. Satoshi's wallet were simply coins. Richard Hart's wallet, or the origin address's wallet, will affect consensus, 100%. Night and day difference, not comparable. All right, the next user here says, none of the people you named ever owned close to 90% of the supply, ever. And all of the named projects were proof of work. In proof of stake, such centralization is even more critical. Exactly my point. So at least there's some smart guys out there who understand how consensus is supposed to work. Now again, I'll play devil's advocate. This could be a huge money-making opportunity, and I think it's probably likely. I just don't think that this is the Ethereum 2.0 killer that Richard Hart made it out to be. And I really don't understand why he was so adamant that it was going to be superior in its decentralization when he clearly must have had this game plan to dominate the token supply, hold out to the last minute, control 90% of it, not tell anybody up front. And how is that supposed to be decentralized? Like, that doesn't make sense. He knows that. He knows how this works. I think that maybe he trusts himself so much and he thinks that everyone else should trust him so much that it's okay. And maybe he thinks of himself as a form of Satoshi. And I just don't get it. It's not the same thing. Proof of stake is not the same as proof of work. If he was launching a proof of work network, fine. Maybe this would work. But he's launching a proof of stake network. Totally different. I've been around. I've seen blockchains like EOS where cartels form and massive amounts of tokens from exchanges vote in select block producers to keep the network in place. Well, what Richard Hart just did right here is become all validators simultaneously, in effect, that same power level, if he so chooses. All right, so moving on here, another counter argument. And this user says, this is not like Hex, where centralization does not matter for the consensus. In a proof of stake system, you need decentralization for healthy consensus. Richard Hart said the founder gets 1%, and by looking at the sacrifices, assuming a single address for volume bonuses, the largest holder would have been about 4%. Then, in the last minute, boom, he takes 90% plus, which in my mind is deceitful and problematic from algorithm perspective, since he can be every single one of the 33 validators. Also, if you knew he would take 90%, why would anyone have sacrificed anything? And that's a very valid point. If I had known that Richard Hart or the Origin address was going to take 90% control of the PLS token supply, would I have sacrificed as much? I definitely would not. And so right there, you can just see that it does affect what would have happened. And in that regard, it is deceitful. You need to let people have transparency and have an understanding, especially if they're going to be sacrificing tokens for something in return. I know it's not explicitly stated, you're not explicitly promised anything, but let's be real, you're promised Pulse tokens. And by someone changing the rules at the last hour of the ICO, which it's not, but the ICO phase, you're changing the rules on everybody. It's deceitful. And the user goes on to say, you would have been better off waiting till this thing opens, dumps like every other ICO initially, and then buy in at a lower price. Pulse will open at 0, so to break even, we technically need a $14 billion market cap now that the Hex tokens have been sacrificed, probably more because of the volume multipliers. And so we'll see how that all works out upon launch, but that's interesting. It does seem to be harder to break even when you start with a much larger market cap because everyone got diluted by at least 10 times. So now here's some contradicting supportive comments. And this user says, it goes back to the Origin address owning more than 50% supply of Hex. If so, there's no whales to prevent manipulation. Owning 90% of PLS is probably good for price action in the future too. Also remember, he's a multi-billionaire. He doesn't need to sell Hex or PLS when he has billions in ETH and BTC. Could be true. He actually could be a billionaire as far as his crypto holdings as well. And this user goes on to say, I wonder why he has done this last minute. Why not do it at the start of the sacrifice period or at any other time during it? Does Richard Hart usually explain these types of actions in videos? And this user replied, if he did it at the start, it would have messed with the volume bonus people who sacrificed would receive. Doing it on the last day meant he got the worst odds and a flat 1.75x bonus that doesn't at all interfere with the volume bonus of everyone else's sacrifice. That is valid. He didn't interfere with anyone's volume bonus sacrifice. He just diluted everyone by 10 or 14 times. And so here's a good summary in my opinion. This user says, so he took Ethereum, made it completely centralized, and assigned 90% of the coins to himself. How does anyone think this is a serious crypto project? You guys are blinded by greed. In 10 years, when Ethereum truly changes the world and much critical financial and government infrastructure is running on Ethereum 2.0 and rollups, PulseChain will be a distant memory. No serious company, government, or organization is going to choose PulseChain, which is 100% controlled by one guy, over Ethereum, which is the truest decentralized and scaling today with rollups. Don't fall for it. You think Richard Hart can't lose his keys? You think he can't just bump validators and just double spend your 100 million Pulse tokens when he chooses, if he chooses so? Having this much of the supply is effectively like having admin keys. This is the issue with proof-of-stake systems when they are so centralized. That's a key point here. Having a 90% control of the supply is like having admin keys to the entire blockchain. It's effectively the same thing. And it's ironic because Richard Hart himself talks so often about how all these DeFi projects that have admin keys are like honeypots waiting to have problems. You have your keys and you can delegate, but it's meaningless since Richard Hart will be able to bump you and double spend you. You just gotta hope it works out. Satoshi can't do that. Vitalik can't do that. Even in EOS, nobody could do that. This all sounds like 2 steps back and going to bed every night hoping that this person that earned an abbreviation, I think he's referring to origin address, won't be the single point of failure in the many potential scenarios that have been mentioned in this thread. You want the market cap to go up after launch with a smaller supply? You're much better off starting at $1 billion and having it rise to $10 billion than having it go from $10 billion, hoping it goes to $100 billion. The break-even market cap is now in the neighborhood of $14 billion. So now here's a user that's in favor of what Richard Hart did. Richard Hart locking down 90% will give the smaller supply effect with bonus of a huge looking market cap. It will draw insane attention and the little guys should benefit. Richard Hart knows market cap is a bad metric. However, he is smart enough to use it as an advertisement of value and success. I think he is going for Pulse to have a $1 trillion market cap, even though its effective liquid market cap is relatively small. Could very well be the case. I think that is probably true. I think that is Richard Hart's goal. I don't agree with the method in which to achieve it, however. I hope you're correct. I definitely would not have dumped as much into it as I did had I known that it would happen at the last minute. Can't undo it now, just gotta hope it works out. And that's kind of the boat that all of us are in. We have to kind of trust that Richard Hart does good by all of us. And this user says, I've invested money and I consider this an extreme loss. I think it's yet to see. You know, like I said, it may be centralized, but it might be a huge moneymaker. It doesn't mean I'm gonna go sell my Bitcoin or my Ethereum at this point and buy more Pulse tokens. It means I'm gonna get my money, get out, and get some true decentralized cryptocurrency. Even if Satoshi came back, he only has 5% of Bitcoin's total supply. Richard has 90% of the PulseChain total supply. Bitcoin is proof of work, so owning coins doesn't give you any power. You need hash rate to control Bitcoin. PulseChain is DPoS, so the more coins you have, the more power you have over consensus. Richard has complete and total control over PulseChain consensus. Satoshi has 0 control over Bitcoin consensus. That's the point. And this user says, is it possible that he has plans to drive the market cap up with this play and then burn the supply he just inflated by making this an origin address for PHEX? This is a sincere question. Anything's possible. Everything that one can hate about Richard Hart is also everything that make him and this whole thing successful. We know for a fact that he is in control of about 90% of the total supply of Hex, and yet the price did nothing but go up. No matter what you think, if someone has to be in control, it is better for all of us for him to be that someone. He did say that the Genesis address will be rewarded by 1%. That is not the same thing as Hex's origin address. I think that is splitting hairs to pretend like Richard Hart is not in control of Hex's origin address, so therefore he didn't take more than 1%. I think that's being pretty naive and silly. I think that Richard Hart holds 90%. I think that there will be some heat toward Richard Hart about this. Yeah, I would hope so. But give it a few years and you will find out that everything, almost what he does, is very well thought out. This is true. You can't compare this to Hex. You can control 99% of Hex and not affect the algorithm. In a proof-of-stake system, you need distribution to have a legitimately working consensus algorithm. Richard Hart can now be every single one of the 33 validators and nobody can do anything about it. From a price pump perspective, short term, this is okay. But if you want to attract other projects to the chain, it's a problem. That is a great summary of this situation. And this user here asks, why would Richard Hart act malicious toward his project if he controls so much? This is the same argument BTC uses for centralization of mining. And the response is, why do rug pulls happen? Why did BitMEX and Mt. Gox shut down? Surely the founders wouldn't want to kill a successful business. So the point is that no matter how good the argument is that someone is vested and has vested interest in not destroying a creation, it does happen. Historically, it's happened. Accidents happen and maliciousness happens. It's not necessarily a bad thing, just a dishonest sales tactic stating that 1% will be his, and then all of a sudden he will get 90% plus. Nobody besides him can ever really be a whale, even the top real money guy that sacrificed. Here's an interesting one. The funny thing is, people, and Richard will too, all using the stat that 14 billion was sacrificed when really it was less than 1 billion and he sent 13 billion to himself. I do understand that basically Richard Hart sent 13 billion to himself. He sent it from the origin address of Hex to PulseChain. Like, he didn't necessarily even lose the funds. He sent the money to himself. Everyone else used real funds. You know, that's another stab in the back. Feels like it. And maybe Richard Hart, I expect Richard Hart has every intention of making it valuable for all these people. The last thing that he wants is to screw everybody over and make all their money go down the drain. I think that he lives for reputation, like I said. And so I think that his intention is to make PulseChain incredibly valuable for everyone, including himself, just like he did for Hex. So it's quite interesting to take a look at this, because you have on one hand the potentiality and likeliness that will make a lot of money, and then on the other hand we have the fact that it's a completely centralized blockchain. So I think the key is just recognizing it for what it is. You know, don't build your future empire on PulseChain. You know, Richard Hart will say build on PulseChain. I'm going to say don't build on PulseChain, because it's completely centralized. And build your projects that you want to grow to the millions and billions dollar market cap, build that on Ethereum, because it's truly decentralized, unless Richard Hart burns his tokens. And in that case, basically, great, it's an awesome blockchain. And this user says, to be honest, I think it will probably be for the best, because all Richard Hart wants is for it to go up. And this will make sure it does, because he won't sell. And he's a megalomaniac until he sells. So true. And the counter argument to that statement is, if Richard Hart never sells, it prevents anyone else from being a whale, since the supply is fixed and will be shrinking, which could mean that serious money will never flow into this thing. Super rich don't buy stuff they can't be a serious player in. Also, just telling people that one person owns 90% of the supply prevents adoption by pretty much everyone. I mean, that's true. Take a look at EOS. I don't think that EOS is even as centralized as this, and yet not many projects built on EOS. Like, compared to Ethereum, not much development is happening on EOS, and it just took the scare of centralization to scare people away. And so here we have 90% tokens in one person's hands, scaring people away. So now here's some comments in favor of Richard Hart's action. Game theory also assumes Richard Hart wouldn't sabotage his own project, especially knowing that people love to accuse him of exactly what he's getting accused of, being a scammer. But again, you're taking that I have to trust him into account on a proof-of-stake algorithm in which token supply determines consensus. It just doesn't mix. I think he did this with the wrong consensus algorithm. And this user says, could this move by Richard Hart have something to do with p-hex? I realize that the Hex Origin Address will receive the same amount of p-hex on PulseChain, but perhaps Richard Hart believes that p-hex will eventually be more valuable than e-hex, Ethereum hex. So Richard Hart plans on using some of those Pulse coins to buy p-hex. Just a thought, and I'm curious what others think about this theory. Yeah, it could be. It could be a massive effort to make p-hex owners wealthy, and maybe Pulse owners wealthy too. And just to end off here, guys, here's one thing from Richard Hart. I've been scouring his YouTube, his Twitter, and Telegram for any kind of comment on this, and I can't find it. I feel like he's either laying low or he's scrubbing user comments on this. It's hard to find discussion on this, especially from him. There's a few threads, but nothing from Richard Hart on this. It's like he's completely ignoring that it happened. You know, and I think that he probably has to, because he has to pretend he's not the origin address. But maybe he'll address it from a pretending I'm a third party and observing it aspect. And I hope that I see that in a future video. So to end off, here's his final comment. I saw this today in response to this user who said, in a recent video, you, Richard Hart, said that we can expect a 14,000x in around 6 years. And Richard Hart replies, I'm telling you what Ethereum did, and that Pulse is better than ETH. Not in decentralization, Richard Hart, not in decentralization, unless you burn those tokens. So I hope you burn those tokens. I hope you freeze them, lock them, make them inaccessible, and so that you can save PulseChain as a valid decentralized cryptocurrency. Because if you leave yourself or the origin address in control of 90% of the token supply, you have just created the largest Amazon web server blockchain in existence. And I hope you make us all rich, but you also failed to create a decentralized blockchain. And I think we can pull it off without that. I think that it's not necessary. I'd love to see PulseChain in 10 years from now making huge gains, but I don't see that happening, and I don't see any big names hopping on board if it's under one person's centralized control. So guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you think that it's smart that he did this. If you just want to get rich, at this point, that's my only stake in this. I just want to make some money. I want to make a 10x or 100x, and then I want to get out. I want to take out my profits. And I'll be happy with profits, but I guess I'll just go back to Ethereum 2.0, because This is clearly not that. Have a great day, guys, and I'll talk to you again soon.